You wake up. You haven't moved yet. You're still lying there, eyes open, staring at the ceiling, and your body feels like it's made of wet sand. Not so exactly. Not sick. Just heavy. Just slow. Like every system inside you is still asleep even though your eyes are open and your brain is technically awake. You sit up. It takes a second longer than it should. You stand. Your knees feel stiff for the first few steps. Your thoughts are slow to arrive, like they're stuck behind a closed door waiting for someone to open it. You tell yourself it's because you didn't sleep enough, or because you're getting older, or because you need coffee. And maybe all three of those things are partially true. But there is something else happening here that almost nobody talks about, something mechanical, something you can actually fix in under 60 seconds, and once you understand what's going on inside your body during that groggy, heavy, slow-motion window after waking up, you will never look at your mornings the same way again. Here's the thing I want to spend the next several minutes actually walking you through. That heavy, tired feeling you have right after waking up isn't really about sleep debt most of the time. It's about circulation. It's about your nervous system. It's about a switch inside your body that hasn't been flipped yet. And there is a single 1-minute habit, something almost embarrassingly simple, that can flip that switch faster than caffeine, faster than a cold shower, faster than scrolling your phone for 20 minutes pretending you're not still half asleep. So let's actually get into the mechanics of why your body feels tired even after rest, and exactly what this 1-minute habit is doing inside you that nothing else does quite as efficiently. Let's start with what's actually happening physiologically the moment you wake up. While you sleep, your body shifts into what's called a parasympathetic dominant state. This is your rest and digest mode. Your heart rate drops. Your blood pressure drops. Your blood vessels, particularly in your extremities, partially constrict because your body doesn't need to be pumping blood aggressively out to your hands and feet while you're lying motionless for 7 or 8 hours. Your metabolism slows. Your core temperature actually drops slightly during the night, bottoming out in the early morning hours just before you wake. Your muscles, having been inactive for hours, have very little blood flow moving through them compared to when you're upright and moving during the day. Now here's the part most people never think about. The moment your alarm goes off, your brain wakes up almost instantly. Consciousness returns in seconds. But your circulatory system does not. Your nervous system does not. Your blood vessels do not instantly snap back into their daytime, active, sympathetic nervous system state. There's a lag. A real, measurable, physiological lag between the moment your brain says we are awake now and the moment your body actually catches up and starts operating like a body that's awake. This lag is sometimes called sleep inertia, and researchers have measured it directly. Cognitive performance, reaction time, and motor coordination can remain impaired for anywhere from a few minutes up to 2 hours after waking, depending on what stage of sleep you were pulled out of. That fog you feel isn't laziness. It isn't weakness. It's your nervous system running on the previous program for several more minutes while your brain has already switched apps. So why does movement, specifically a very particular kind of movement, fix this so quickly? Because movement is the single fastest signal your body has for telling your nervous system to switch from parasympathetic to sympathetic. When your muscles contract, especially large muscle groups like your legs and your back, they act like a secondary pump for your circulatory system. Your heart is the primary pump, obviously, but your skeletal muscles, when they contract and relax repeatedly, squeeze the veins running through them and push blood back toward your heart far more efficiently than your heart working alone against gravity. This is sometimes called the skeletal muscle pump, or the second heart effect, and it's especially powerful in your calves and thighs because that's where a huge percentage of your blood pools when you're inactive. So here is the 1-minute habit. It is not complicated. It is not a hack you need to buy a product for. The moment you wake up, before you check your phone, before you sit up slowly and shuffle to the bathroom, you do 60 seconds of full body movement while you are still lying in bed or standing right beside it. Specifically, you do a combination of ankle pumps, full body stretching with your arms reaching overhead while your legs extend in the opposite direction, and then, critically, you stand up and do 20 to 30 seconds of either marching in place, lifting your knees high, or doing slow calf raises. That's it. That's the entire habit. Less than a minute. But the effect on your circulatory and nervous system is dramatically larger than the simplicity suggests, and here's exactly why. The ankle pumps and calf raises specifically target the largest reservoir of pooled, stagnant blood in your body after a night of inactivity. Your calf muscles contain an extensive network of veins, and during sleep, with no muscular contraction happening for hours, blood flow through this region slows considerably. The moment you contract your calf muscles through pumping or raising your heels, you are mechanically squeezing those veins and sending a surge of blood back up toward your heart and into general circulation. This isn't a vague wellness claim. It is basic vascular physiology, and it is the same mechanism doctors rely on when they tell post-surgical patients to do ankle pumps in a hospital bed to prevent blood clots from forming due to stagnant circulation. The body's mechanism for moving blood when you're horizontal and inactive depends heavily on these exact muscle groups. The full body stretch, arms overhead, legs extended, does something slightly different but equally important. It activates what's known as a proprioceptive signal cascade. Your muscles and joints are loaded with receptors that detect stretch and tension, and when you actively elongate your spine and limbs after a night of stillness, you send a strong, unmistakable signal up through your nervous system that essentially says, "We are active now, prepare the systems for movement." This is part of why animals, almost universally, stretch immediately upon waking. It's not a cute behavioral quirk. It's a deeply conserved physiological mechanism for transitioning the nervous system out of rest mode. And then there's the standing component, the marching or knee lifts. This is where things get particularly interesting, because standing upright itself triggers something called the baroreceptor reflex. When you go from lying flat to standing, gravity immediately starts pulling blood downward into your legs. Your body has pressure sensors, baroreceptors, located in your carotid arteries and aorta, that detect this shift in blood pressure and immediately trigger your heart rate to increase and your blood vessels to constrict slightly in order to maintain adequate blood flow to your brain. This is a survival mechanism, and it happens within seconds. But if you stand up too slowly, too passively, this reflex can lag, which is part of why some people feel dizzy or lightheaded when they first stand up in the morning. Active movement immediately after standing, specifically rhythmic movement like marching or calf raises, accelerates this baroreceptor adjustment and gets blood moving to your brain and major organs far faster than standing still would. Now let's talk about what this means for that brain fog specifically, because that's usually the symptom people care about most. Your brain, despite being only about 2% of your total body weight, consumes roughly 20% of your oxygen and glucose supply. It is enormously metabolically demanding, and it depends entirely on a steady, robust supply of oxygenated blood to function at full capacity. When your circulatory system is still operating in its sluggish, overnight, parasympathetic dominant state, your brain is, quite literally, running on a reduced fuel supply compared to what it needs for sharp, fast cognition. This is a major contributor to that cotton-headed, slow-to-think feeling in the first 20 to 30 minutes after waking. By rapidly increasing circulation through targeted movement, you are directly increasing oxygen and glucose delivery to brain tissue, which is part of why people who do even brief morning movement routines consistently report feeling mentally sharper within minutes, not hours. There's also a hormonal piece to this that almost nobody mentions. Cortisol, often vilified as simply a stress hormone, actually follows a very specific and healthy daily rhythm called the cortisol awakening response. In a normally functioning system, cortisol levels rise sharply in the 30 to 45 minutes after waking. This isn't a bad thing. This rise is what helps mobilize energy, increase alertness, and prepare your body for the demands of the day. Movement, particularly movement that elevates your heart rate even slightly, has been shown to amplify and accelerate this natural cortisol rise. So that 1 minute of movement isn't just mechanically pushing blood around your body. It's also nudging your endocrine system to release the exact hormone your body is already designed to use as a natural, built-in alertness mechanism in the morning. You are essentially cooperating with a system your body already wants to run, rather than fighting against grogginess with caffeine, which works through a completely different and frankly more artificial mechanism, blocking adenosine receptors rather than actually addressing the underlying circulatory sluggishness. I want to address something directly here, because I know what some of you are thinking. Isn't this just exercise? Why does it need its own name, its own framing, as some kind of special 1-minute habit? And the honest answer is that the timing and the specificity matter enormously. A full workout an hour after waking is great, but it doesn't solve the immediate problem of feeling like a zombie for the first 30 minutes of consciousness, and most people don't have the energy or motivation to exercise while still in that foggy state anyway, which is part of why so many people skip morning workouts entirely. The 1-minute habit works precisely because it requires almost no motivation, no equipment, no transition out of the bedroom, and it directly targets the specific physiological lag, the gap between brain waking up and body catching up, that's responsible for the grogginess in the first place. It's not a replacement for exercise. It's a targeted intervention for a very specific, narrow physiological window. Let's also talk about why this matters more for some people than others, because the severity of sleep inertia is not evenly distributed across the population. People who wake up during deep slow-wave sleep, rather than lighter stages, tend to experience significantly more severe sleep inertia, sometimes lasting well over an hour. This is part of why sleep tracking devices that attempt to wake you during a lighter sleep stage have become popular, because waking from deep sleep produces a more profound disconnect between brain consciousness and bodily readiness. People who are sleep deprived to begin with also experience worse sleep inertia, because their brains are essentially fighting to stay in restorative deep sleep even as the alarm forces consciousness. And older adults, interestingly, often experience this lag differently due to naturally reduced vascular elasticity, meaning their blood vessels don't constrict and dilate as quickly or efficiently as younger adults, which can prolong that morning sluggishness even further. For all of these populations, the 1-minute movement habit isn't just a nice to have. It's addressing a more pronounced version of the exact same circulatory lag problem. Now I want to get specific about how to actually do this, because the details matter more than people assume. The order matters. You start while still lying down, before you even sit up, with 10 to 15 seconds of ankle pumps, flexing your feet up and down rapidly, engaging your calf muscles. Then you do a full body stretch, reaching your arms overhead while pointing your toes in the opposite direction, creating tension through your entire spine, holding for about 5 to 10 seconds, then releasing. Then you sit up, pause for 2 or 3 seconds to let your baroreceptor reflex catch up slightly, and then you stand. Once standing, you spend the remaining 20 to 30 seconds doing either marching in place with high knees, or slow controlled calf raises, rising up onto your toes and lowering back down. The entire sequence takes under a minute, but it moves through every major mechanism we just discussed: venous return through calf activation, proprioceptive nervous system signaling through stretching, and baroreceptor-driven circulatory adjustment through standing movement. People who adopt this consistently report a few specific changes within the first week or two. The most commonly reported change is a reduction in that initial fog, the feeling of needing several minutes before your brain feels like it's actually working. The second most common report is feeling less reliant on caffeine to feel functional in the first half hour of the day, not because caffeine stops working, but because the underlying grogginess it was masking is simply less severe to begin with. Some people also report fewer headaches in the first hour after waking, which makes physiological sense given that morning headaches are sometimes linked to changes in cerebral blood flow and vascular tone during the sleep-to-wake transition. I also want to be honest about the limits of this. This 1-minute habit is not a substitute for adequate total sleep duration. If you are chronically sleep deprived, getting 5 or 6 hours a night when your body needs 7 or 8, no amount of morning movement is going to fully compensate for that deficit. What this habit addresses specifically is the circulatory and nervous system lag that exists even after adequate sleep, the gap between consciousness and full bodily readiness. If you are still exhausted by mid-morning despite doing this, the underlying issue is more likely total sleep quantity or quality rather than this particular transitional window, and that's worth being honest about rather than oversold. There's a bigger pattern worth noticing here, something that connects to a much larger truth about the human body. We tend to think of our physiology in extremes: either we're asleep or we're awake, either we're resting or we're active, as if these are simple binary switches. But the reality is that your body operates through gradual systemic transitions, your nervous system shifting slowly from parasympathetic to sympathetic dominance, your blood vessels gradually adjusting their tone, your hormones rising and falling along their own particular curves. Almost nothing in physiology happens instantly, and the gap between brain consciousness and full bodily readiness is just one small, specific, but extremely common example of this broader principle. The good news embedded in that truth is that because these transitions are physical and mechanical rather than purely psychological, they can be deliberately accelerated through physical input. You don't have to passively wait out your grogginess. You can directly intervene in the exact mechanism causing it. Let's talk for a moment about the people who try this and say it doesn't work for them, because that feedback is worth taking seriously rather than dismissing. The most common reason this habit fails to produce noticeable results is rushing it. People do a half-hearted, 3-second version, a single stretch, a couple of half-effort knee lifts, and then wonder why they don't feel different. The mechanisms we just walked through, venous return through calf contraction, proprioceptive nervous system activation, baroreceptor adjustment through standing, all of them depend on a certain threshold of actual muscular engagement. A token gesture toward movement doesn't reach that threshold. The second most common reason is sequencing. People stand up first and stretch afterward, which skips the important step of engaging the calf muscles while still horizontal, before gravity has already started pulling blood downward on its own. The order isn't arbitrary. It's built around the specific physiological lag we discussed, addressing the pooled blood first, then the nervous system signal, then the upright postural adjustment last, once the first two have already started working. There's also a psychological layer to why this particular habit tends to stick where other morning routines fail. Most morning routine advice involves either willpower, getting up earlier than you want to, or friction, walking to another room, finding equipment, changing clothes. This one requires neither. It happens in the same physical space you already occupy the moment you wake up, it takes less time than reading a single text message, and it requires zero equipment and zero preparation. Behavioral scientists who study habit formation consistently point to friction reduction as one of the single most reliable predictors of whether a new behavior actually becomes automatic. The lower the activation energy required to start a behavior, the more likely it survives the first few weeks when motivation is naturally at its lowest and most fragile. A 60-second movement sequence performed in the exact spot you already are when you wake up has about as low a friction profile as a health habit can possibly have, which is part of why people who try it tend to actually keep doing it, compared to more elaborate morning routines that get abandoned within a week or two. I also want to address something that comes up constantly in discussions like this, the question of whether this is somehow just a more elaborate way of saying exercise is good for you, which everyone already knows. And I think that framing misses something important. Yes, broadly speaking, physical activity benefits circulation, that's not controversial or new information. But there's a meaningful difference between a general statement like movement is good for you and a specific, mechanistic explanation of why a particular 60-second sequence, performed at a particular moment, in a particular order, addresses a particular physiological lag that has a name, sleep inertia, and a measurable duration, sometimes extending well past 30 minutes or even longer in people pulled from deep sleep. Knowing that the fog you feel each morning has an actual mechanical explanation, stagnant venous blood, a nervous system still operating on its overnight settings, a baroreceptor reflex that hasn't caught up yet, transforms a vague piece of wellness advice into something you can actually understand and therefore trust enough to stick with. It's also worth comparing this directly to the other tools people commonly reach for first thing in the morning, because the comparison reveals something important about why this particular habit deserves more attention than it gets. Caffeine works by blocking adenosine receptors in the brain, adenosine being a chemical that builds up throughout the day and promotes feelings of sleepiness. Blocking those receptors doesn't actually clear adenosine from your system or address circulatory sluggishness at all, it simply prevents your brain from registering the sleepiness signal for a period of time, which is part of why caffeine taken too early in the morning, before the natural cortisol rise has even peaked, can sometimes blunt your body's own healthy alertness mechanisms and lead to a harder crash later when the caffeine wears off. Scrolling your phone, the other extremely common first minutes of the day habit, does essentially nothing for circulation and arguably makes the sleep inertia window feel longer, because passive visual stimulation without physical movement keeps your nervous system in a low arousal state even while your eyes are processing information. Movement, by contrast, directly targets the mechanical root of the problem rather than masking it or ignoring it. There's a deeper principle at play here too, one that applies well beyond just mornings. Your body, throughout the entire day, relies heavily on muscular contraction, particularly in your legs, to assist your circulatory system in moving blood efficiently. This is why people who sit for extended periods at desks throughout the day often experience similar, though usually milder, versions of that same heavy, sluggish feeling in the late afternoon, because prolonged stillness allows blood to pool in the lower body regardless of the time of day. The same mechanism that explains morning grogginess after a night of stillness also explains the 2 o'clock slump many people feel after a few hours of uninterrupted sitting. Once you understand this single underlying principle, that prolonged stillness causes circulatory sluggishness which your brain experiences as fatigue and fog, you start to see it everywhere, not just in the morning, and the same general solution, brief, deliberate, targeted movement, becomes a tool you can apply throughout your entire day, not just in the first 60 seconds after your alarm goes off. I want to leave you with one more layer to this, because I think it reframes the entire conversation. We tend to treat tiredness as a single, undifferentiated feeling, as if all fatigue comes from the same source and therefore requires the same fix, usually more sleep or more caffeine. But fatigue is actually a category that contains several distinct physiological states with different causes. There's fatigue from genuine sleep deprivation, which requires more total sleep and nothing else will truly fix it. There's fatigue from poor sleep quality, disrupted architecture, frequent awakenings, which requires addressing whatever is fragmenting your sleep stages. And then there's this specific transitional fatigue, the sleep inertia window, which has almost nothing to do with how much or how well you slept and everything to do with how quickly your circulatory and nervous systems catch up to your already awake brain. Conflating these three categories is part of why so many people pour more and more sleep, more and more caffeine, into a problem that was never actually about quantity in the first place. Learning to distinguish between them, and applying the right, specific tool to each one, is a far more precise and ultimately more effective approach than treating every morning the same way and hoping a generic fix eventually works. So here's what I want you to actually do with this. Tomorrow morning, before anything else, before the phone, before the bathroom, before the coffee maker, give your body the full 60 seconds. Ankle pumps while you're still lying down, engaging those calf veins where blood has been pooling for hours. A deliberate full-body stretch, arms reaching one direction, legs reaching the other, sending a clear signal through your nervous system that the rest phase is over. Then stand, and spend the remaining time marching in place or doing slow calf raises, giving your baroreceptor reflex the active assistance it needs to catch up to gravity. Notice how you feel at the 2-minute mark. Notice whether that familiar fog is thinner, whether your first thoughts arrive a little faster, whether your legs feel a little less like they're moving through wet sand. I think it's also worth saying something about consistency, because a single morning of doing this won't tell you much. The body, like any system that has run on a particular pattern for years, takes a little while to start responding predictably to a new input. Most people who track how they feel notice the clearest improvement somewhere between the 4th and 10th morning, once the sequence has become familiar enough that they're not thinking about the steps anymore, just doing them on autopilot the way you'd brush your teeth without consciously planning each stroke. That automaticity matters, because a habit you have to consciously remember and motivate yourself toward every single day is far more fragile than one your body simply does without requiring a decision. The first few mornings are the ones where you have to actively choose it. After that, if the early signal, however small, however subtle, is there, the behavior tends to start reinforcing itself. It's also worth thinking about how this interacts with other parts of your morning, because none of this happens in isolation. Light exposure, for instance, plays its own separate but complementary role in regulating your circadian rhythm and your cortisol response. Getting outside, or even just standing near a bright window, in the minutes after this movement sequence, adds another layer of signal to your nervous system that reinforces the same message your muscles just sent, that the rest period has ended and the active period has begun. The two aren't competing strategies, they're stacking on top of each other, each one addressing a slightly different system, light affecting your suprachiasmatic nucleus and circadian signaling, movement affecting your circulatory and peripheral nervous system, both ultimately converging on the same outcome, a body and brain that are actually synchronized rather than running on two different clocks for the first half hour of the day. There's one more thing worth mentioning, which is what happens on the mornings when, for whatever reason, you skip it. Maybe you're running late, maybe you forget, maybe you're traveling and your environment is unfamiliar. On those mornings, most people who have been doing this consistently report noticing the absence almost immediately, a kind of comparative awareness they didn't have before they started paying attention to this transitional window at all. That awareness itself is valuable, independent of the habit. Once you understand that the fog isn't simply an unavoidable tax you pay every single morning, but rather the predictable result of a specific, addressable physiological lag, you stop accepting it passively. You start noticing when it's worse than usual and asking why, whether you skipped the movement, whether you were pulled from deep sleep, whether you're more sleep deprived than you realized. That shift, from passively enduring your mornings to actively understanding them, tends to be the thing people say changes their relationship with their own body the most, far more than the 60 seconds of movement itself. Your body already has every mechanism it needs to wake up just as quickly as your brain does. It has simply been waiting, morning after morning, for you to give it the signal to start.